right, welcome everybody to episode 70 of the Unchained Vodcast. Today we're going to talk about one of the most recent streams we had, or that they made anyway at City State, and that is the Mage stream. They actually dropped quite a bit of interesting and useful information during the stream, so we got some good
For
stuff to
once,
talk
we're
about.
not going to have to make up stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll make up some stuff, but we actually have quite a bit of things to talk about here. For those who may not be completely up to date, Camelot Unchained will have, of course, a mage class, and specifically we'll have 3 different mages, one for each realm. The Arthurian being the fire mage, the Tuatha being the druid,
Chaos.
the druid, and the Viking being the wave weaver or the moisture mancer, as people like to call them.
Yeah.
So, some things that they've revealed to us previously and kind of reinforced now in this stream is that spells will function on a number of different basic components, and these are kind of important for the discussion that we're going to have today. First is runes. Every spell starts with a rune, which is really what the spell is. It is the spell effect.
Right.
What is going to be caused or created, whether it's damaging someone, obscuring something, etc., etc. Second is the shape, which is how the rune, how the effect is being delivered. Is it being lobbed overhead? Is it just kind of shooting out as a dart?
Is it an AoE?
Yeah, there's a lot of different options for that, and for some of the
method.
and for some of the classes, it is they have a couple of custom shapes that the others don't have, and we'll get into that. Next is the focus, which is really the weapon that you're using.
Yes.
The type of wand or rod. For instance, the fire mage has wands, and the
Druid has scepters.
Yes, scepters, and the moisture mancer has a gauntlet that they can use, and so what you're using will. There's different types of each of these, and they'll have different effects that can, but don't necessarily have to be applied to your different abilities, your different spells. Lastly, there are infusions, which are actually kind of consumables of some
This
sort.
is a new thing. I didn't know what these were leading into today.
Yeah. This was very, very new in this stream. They just kind of dropped these on us. They're some sort of consumables that you can carry in your inventory, and they will, I guess, empower certain abilities that they're set to. But of course, you can run out of them, and they seem to imply that these are gathered from like enemies, like fallen enemies, and perhaps some other locations.
I suspect it's their new take on the souls that they used to talk about. The piece of souls that you get from enemies you kill.
Maybe.
Yeah, and they're not new in the sense of testing. They've been in testing for weeks and weeks and weeks, but the concept of them being a consumable optional thing is new, that I didn't know they were going that route.
Yeah, I'm still hoping that souls are a thing for crafting. But maybe these are kind of like the ability version of that, so that you're not using enemies' souls on abilities, but instead there are other things you can harvest, and that would be good to keep the crafters and the other people from leeching from the same well. Diversify it up a bit. So the first thing I really wanted to talk about here is actually not quite getting into the classes yet, but some of the ability type things that they mentioned. The first one is cooldowns. They mentioned that the cooldowns for abilities are going to be component based, but they're not really going to be based on the runes, which is the effect of the ability, but more so they're probably going to be based on currently are based on the shape. So that if you use like one dart spell, and that has, you can't cast another dart spell while that's still on cooldown if it has a cooldown. And this is in similar fashion. For instance, the fire mage has a wall shape, so you can't just throw up multiple walls because that has a duration and a cooldown until it's done. So you can only do so many with that. You can only have like one wall at a time. So. I just generally wanted to see what your thoughts are on this, because they definitely, we've always known that they're trying to avoid having a lot of universal cooldowns that affect everything, and there's this basis of cooldown based on the shape of the spell.
I like that there's no global cooldowns. It's usually something that is annoying for mages and for caster types. At least for me, in most games, it kind of forces you to be creative in the type of spells you use when you create them, because otherwise you're just limiting yourself. If you want to specialize in one type of spell, you're gonna gimp yourself basically by increasing your cooldowns, because you can use only one ability at a time.
Good.
I was going to say that I was just thinking that it seems likely to me, based on what we've seen in beta about how the abilities work, that this likely won't affect certain spells. For instance, like darts. Darts are just, you shoot it and it goes pew and hits someone directly. Unless they have the cooldown be the actual flight time, which, given what we know of how it works right now, I would say that seems unlikely. The flight time of an ability probably doesn't count for the cooldown. It's more just when you're casting it. So really, the certain abilities like darts or maybe balls and things like that don't seem likely to have even any cooldown at all. Whereas this will predominantly affect things like walls or barriers was another one that was interesting.
Yeah.
I could see maybe the dart volley, at least for the flame wardens. That's a flame warden specific. Or the siege ball having a cooldown to it. But
Well,
yeah, the dart
the
ball,
cooldown could be the travel time, since it says it's a slow moving delivery method.
It could be. I don't think it will end up being that. But I do like if dart doesn't have one. I like that because a lot of these effects require a combination of you start with one ability, do another one that uses the benefit of the first, to really create a combination of effects going on, and
not
you
just
won't
that,
be able to do that if they're carrying cooldowns.
Especially since the dart, from the description, I suspect the dart is a close combat ability.
Short
Because it
range,
has
travels
low
fast.
tracking, fast moving, low tracking. That sounds a lot like a close combat defensive, or attack, but close combat ability.
Now,
If you put cooldowns on those,
yeah.
that reduces the survivability of the mage by a lot.
Now, I do assume that it's probably not going to be really a melee ranged ability, but just
No.
rather a shorter, like semi-close range
Right.
attack.
Yeah, like you're getting charged. It's not like you're targeting, like with the ball, where you're targeting a specific target, but when you're being charged, throwing a dart would probably be the kind of things you can do. I see the beam being something that's a channeled ability, so the cooldown would be that basically. You channel it as long as you have the mana for it, and then you stop, or you stop whenever you're getting too low. But no cooldown, but a basically a concentration spell.
Yeah, Strike mentioned, and this was something that came up on the stream as well. Strike mentioned being able to dual wield magic, and with how they have this system described, I don't see many ways that could be very feasible. Just because, at least from what we've seen in the beta test so far, you cast an ability, your whole animation is pretty much casting that ability. So maybe they could do some variation where you do different animations with each arm separately, so you could do two. But then you've suddenly got one class that could do two attacks at the same time, which would
Most
be
class will be able to do that.
potentially problematic.
It would have to limit like certain of these spells would utilize both hands as a requirement, and one or two might be able to utilize
like the dart.
hand.
You could dual wield the dart, but an explosion or a cone or a wall would require both hands.
One thing I was thinking of, because when this got asked during the stream, and they kind of went, I don't know whether that'll be possible or not. They said they didn't say it wouldn't be possible, but they said we don't know that it'll be possible. So that tells me they haven't discussed it and aren't necessarily planning to do that. But one thing that it occurred to me they could do is, since you have these the focus, and you can have a certain type of focus and to situate different spells with that, there's no reason you couldn't dual wield and have two different foci, and have some abilities which use one and some abilities which use the other, and then alternate based on that way. You'd at least have two options for different spells with different foci. And
Sure.
Things like that. Be able to vary it up a little bit based on what you want to do for each ability.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Grimslag, the definitely the tracking for abilities is something that's going to be very important in this game. Especially with mages being very long range, shooting those very long, like siege ball style delivery methods for their abilities. It's very easy to dodge those if you're paying attention because you can just see them soaring through the air in your direction. The next thing I wanted to talk about was slows. Now, crowd control has been a frequent topic, both on this show but also on their wrap-ups. It keeps getting asked about different types of CC.
It's a pretty common question.
And one thing I noticed was that every single one of these classes had some form of slow mentioned.
Let's see. I know for sure the Wave Weaver does.
The Wave Weaver had much more.
Yes, because it's more the Wave Weaver is
the
more
ice and frost base
control. Yeah, it's more of a CC oriented caster.
Yeah, but if you look at Flame Warden, I think it was the Deepstone Lava ability reduces their movement speed slightly for a brief duration.
Yeah, and stacks.
And I'm pretty sure the Druid had something as well for that.
Yeah, the corruption chaos, the corrupting chaos.
So they pretty much, they definitely vary in strength. But I did notice that they seem to be pushing, all right, we're going to have this slow effect, and all the mages are going to be able to do it to some extent.
That's pretty typical for a mage class, though, to have some way of create distance. CC. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So
I like that they're not going the hard CC route, though.
Right. Yeah,
as they said they would.
That's always been significant. They've said they were not going to do that. But I was wondering if there were any, and this gets into the realm of speculation, but we know that these aren't finite ability lists by any means. Yeah. They're just a fraction of what should go in game, ultimately. So I was wondering what other types of crowd control you could see for each of the classes going into there.
Well, for the Flame Warden, I was thinking a confusion effect kind of makes it hard to go the I don't remember which game it is. Actually in the Division 2 you have that, and in another MMO I was playing you have that, where when you're confused or dazed, if you press your forward button, your character is going to go left or right. It never actually goes straight. So you can run around. You can't really direct your character properly. So something like that.
That kind of ties into almost the panic mechanic that they're aiming for, which I would love to see the Flame Warden with their like wall of fire. The closer you get to the wall, if it was a bigger wall, the more panic you take from getting close to try to deter you. Rather than using it as an offensive ability, it's more of a defensive, don't come near me kind of thing.
Yeah.
That could be interesting. Yeah, for the fire, this is kind of almost like a MOBA mechanic to a certain degree, but for the fire mage, I would kind of like to see something like a knock-up ability. Because they're so fire-based, I'm assuming they're going to have a number of explosions and things of that nature in there. So why not have one that just and they've got a volcanic ability, so why not just grab the ground and go and knock people up in the air? Not to knock them down or actually, disrupt them completely, but as a brief disruption type thing that just very briefly disrupts people in the front line or just kind of knocks them up so they can't advance for a second. I actually pictured something for the Druid because they have the chaos and the void magic. For some reason, something like a confusion spell seems appropriate for them to me. Though I was thinking maybe something that slows action time or something, slows their casting time. But I do actually kind of like the idea of some sort of randomized element to their movement or something that somehow makes it more difficult for them to control or get away from abilities that are targeting them.
With their magic type, I kind of envision almost I think it's the Hunger of Hadar D&D spell with tentacles coming out, chaos tentacles coming out that can have a chance to slow you if you walk through it.
Or a black hole ability that actually pulls you towards it. and preventing you from moving away from it or making it harder. You need a bigger mass. Like the pull, the attraction effect depends on your mass and things like that.
That could be cool. I mean, it's kind of a slow effect, which they already have, but similarly, like a confusion or something could be something that's just really annoying, like just turns them around backwards as they're walking. So for like a brief effect, they're walking and you cast it, and suddenly they flip around and start walking the other way, and then they have to turn and be like, "Wait, what?" Turn it. They gain control back pretty quickly, but they're at that point turned around in a weird direction, and it'd be random fun stuff to mess with people. For the
TBD, if I recall, way back when in the initial class reveal, seemed to have the most panic related abilities, and I could see them again with panic doing something with that to deter people from getting too close.
That's true. I do kind of like the idea of like a big firewall imbuing panic if you force yourself to walk onto it, because then it's not so much of a CC as it is a deterrent, but it is kind of a kind of an area denial ability, which is supposed to be if you insist on walking through it. It's like, well, I mean, you can if you want to, but it is going to have repercussions. And for the Vikings, for the Wave Weaver, it just seems so obvious to me that they should have a knockback. What with all the water spells?
Tidal wave.
They have the wave shape that projects a large, slow-moving wave towards the target.
Exactly. I'm like, that should just be knocking people back. Or at least some version of it could have the ability to possibly, push people back a certain degree.
Actually, one of the effects that could be interesting also for the Flame Warden is some abilities that have a component that make you catch fire. And it's kind of a root effect where you can't move. Your character is just trying to put out the flames, like the stop, drop, and roll.
Gotcha.
It's kind of a hard CC almost.
Yeah. It's getting close there.
It is getting close. Well, there is the infusion regarding the knockbacks, the Bog Ooze infusion, which is available to, I believe, 2 of the factions.
Yeah, because it
has a knockback tied to it.
It's something you drop from a TDD character.
Okay.
Yeah,
it's not built
each
into
realm
the
has
shapes.
A few infusions that are common because they're dropped from the 3rd realm.
Right.
Okay. Now, one of the things I did also want to talk to, actually getting into some of the specific class stuff here, is custom boons. Each one of the classes has some custom boons, some custom spell shapes, and things of that nature. So what I noticed so far is that the Fire Warden has, within their custom boons, they have mention of damage over time and reduction to fire resistance. The Druid has pretty much just damage and more damage. That's pretty much what seems to be mentioned in their custom boon.
They also have resistance to their own damage types as well.
Well, yeah, I noticed they all seem to have a resistance to their own damage type, which is curious.
Which is weird. It's weird. You'd think they'd have the resistance to someone else's damage type.
Yeah, but there are
especially the Flame Warden, who's extremely specialized in fire-based damage.
There are different class. I noticed the mages don't, but there are different classes that have access to some of these elements. For instance, we know that the heavy fighter for the Arthurian, the Black Knight, has a void damage attack. So
it does now,
there are some reasons for that. I think they're going to probably spread that. The Viking, the Wave Weaver, their custom boons mention slows and self-heal. This is mainly looking at the ones that don't, that are just kind of stand out, that are different.
Yeah.
They're also very unique in the way they work with the types of runes that you're using. It's not just a general, this does everything. It's specifically spells that utilize this rune.
I like that. It really shows, because we've speculated on that a lot, but that kind of information shows that you will really be able to customize your character pretty heavily in terms of what you can do, and the same Flame Wardens could be completely different in how they play.
Yeah, one of the things that I noticed here, which I have to say, There are some things I have some issues with.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, where was this at? Maybe it was maybe it was one of the abilities for the Flame Warden, because I'm not seeing it now, that reduces fire resistance. It must have been one of the abilities, not one of
It
the
was a boon.
boons.
No, it should be a boon.
Oh,
It's the first one, fireproof.
No, that increases yours, but I could have sworn they had an
Yeah.
ability or something that decreased enemy fire resistance. And now I'm
There's
not
one in
seeing
beta
it.
testing.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Now I'm just not seeing it here.
Yeah, it's
I think it was a
incandescent, incandescent fire.
Yeah,
is
so
the
it's
rune.
actually an ability. I'm sorry. I got that mixed up. But one of the things I noticed about this is the the Fire Mage is the only one of these that only does one damage type. So it's
correct.
kind of important that they have an ability that reduces fire resistance.
Yes.
Because they are the
it's so
only. They
easy
are
to,
seriously locked into that.
yeah.
They're also the only of the three that has an increased base movement speed boon, and they were depicted as being the glass cannon that needs to really just kind of sit in place to do its maximum damage potential. And they gave it the ability to run around faster than everyone else of the mages.
Yeah.
Which is not completely contradictory, because you could, if you're a glass cannon, you need to stay out of harm's way.
True.
So stopping, casting, and then getting the hell out of dodge will probably be the main tactic of those when you're not in a group that protects you.
There are some other applications, I think, for that, but I don't want to get into shapes yet, and I'll have to bring that up for shapes. But I did notice that customization wise, especially with these boons and stuff for the different classes, there are some, and going into kind of the runes, there are some definite differences. Like the fire mage only does fire, which honestly is potentially a pretty big problem. I'm actually a little bit bothered by that. I'm really hoping there is some other way to do some other type of damage, because they are also not the only one that can debuff enemy resistances. The Druid can also debuff void resistance. So if they were the only one who could debuff someone's resistance, I'd be like, okay, well, I guess that kind of works, but they're not. So
it is a problem. It could be a huge problem if everyone has the ability to build an anti-fire, armor set. If that becomes very limited, depending on your realm, a little less of an issue. But as it stands now, I don't think that's going to be the case. Everyone will probably be able to build up their fire resistance, regardless what you're playing, which does make that an issue.
Yeah, that's kind of been my take on it. Is you can build an armor set that's going to resist you against whatever you want. And so if Arthurians are doing really well in the game, you can on your server, you can build anti-fire gear and really screw over all their fire mages. Even though they can diminish it, I'm assuming it's otherwise. I'm assuming that it's still going to really hurt them. Otherwise, either they have to nerf the class a ton, or the class is going to do tons of damage if you don't build an anti-fire gear set.
Right.
In which case, then it's mandatory.
Well, if it's a one-trick pony class, then you have to make it worth your while to do that and force the others to counter it. Because otherwise, if you don't make it powerful enough that the others have to take into account that you need to build your fire resistance, then the class is useless.
Yeah, and I don't know, Strike. I don't necessarily agree that the Wave Weaver is a counter to the Fire Mage just because they use water. Because as we know, with air, water hits fire. It doesn't overpower it. It just makes steam, so it just creates a different effect. Because I would say the counters are based on different classes. So the archer is and the stealther are perhaps counters to the mage, but I don't see different realms mages being counters to each other necessarily.
I would agree. I don't think the mages are made to be counters to each other. I think there's going to be other classes that are designed to do that.
Yeah.
Water and frost are, for at least the Wave Weaver, are pretty close. It's basically like all fire. I definitely see the TDD having flexibility in going arcane versus chaos, but water and fire both have kind of a specialized role.
Except I assume different damage types. So when it comes
They
to
are,
armor
in fact,
resistance,
right?
Yeah.
They are in fact different damage types. And it's really just a priority of what they're focusing in. With being a glass cannon, the Flame Wardens are damage only, and fire is usually represented as destruction and just pure damage.
Yeah, so I guess what it could really come down to is the burning damage, whether or not the damage over time is sufficient to kind of replace that. But it still just seems to me that it simplifies the combat against the Arthurians to a certain degree.
It does.
Where other factions can just go, well, we're just going to stack fire resistance, and if we're having problems with their mages, and now no one wants to play Arthurian mages because everyone's running around with fire resistance.
The alternative or the converse is, if you're stacking pure anti-fire, you're losing out against all the other things that the Arthurians can do, and you're going to take the brunt force of that damage.
Now, they did say something. Strike brings up the issue with air and these combinations of different elements. They did say something during the live stream about that I thought was noteworthy, and that was that they didn't necessarily say that combinations wouldn't be logical, but they did suggest that some of the combinations, at the very least, some of the combinations of abilities that coincide and create a different magical effect, will create a new thing. They won't necessarily be creating something that's based on the two elements as much as it's going to be creating a new thing based on a chart that they've made and went, okay, this plus this but does this. So that to me suggested that they don't necessarily have to say, okay, well, water and lightning goes extra damage. They can go water and lightning makes freaking flying squirrels. They can kind of I don't necessarily agree that they shouldn't make it logical, because I think it'll be easier to remember and utilize if it's somewhat logical. But they seem to be suggesting that at least some of the abilities won't necessarily have a logical outcome as much as it will just create an entirely new magical thing.
Hopefully. The thing is, you still need a like he says. The problem is not so much what combos with what, is the fact that a fire mage that is purely fire will need to have the other classes of his realm being able to combo with that.
And I think one of the things you could look at for the different types of combinations they have is you could look at, for instance, what's the name of that game? Spellbreak, which is currently it's a game. It's similar to PUBG and stuff, except it's fantasy based. But they actually have a system that's very similar to Air, where some of the different spells, when they coincide, they create a new effect. And some of them don't make sense, but they still do it anyway because it's fun. And so if you shoot a poison cloud and you hit it with a ice spell, it turns into a giant frozen cloud. Does that make sense? No, but it's what they do. If you do a poison cloud and you hit it with fire, it turns into a flaming poison inferno that does both poison and fire damage. Again, it doesn't really make sense, but it's still fun, and that's what they decided to do. So, there are different things they could do with that. One of the things I wanted to mention about custom boons before we got too far off of that is, aside from the fire mage having their dots and the druid being damage all day long, from what it looks like, the wave weaver has a ton of slows and can self-heal. Now, they've generally avoided having anything that's not a healer heal. But the Wave Weaver can self-heal.
There's a little bit of a self-heal there, yeah.
The problem is those descriptions are vague, and what do they mean by a small amount?
Because if it's a tiny amount, then why even have it? It doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it does matter, especially when you're a CC-based class. Survivability is key, and being
Yeah,
able to outmaneuver, outslow,
and
outrun, and stay
outlast.
alive longer. That slow. It's basically kind of like the Sith assassin from SWTOR, who had so many different CC abilities, and then on top of that, self heals. Only it's a mage and has other things too, but.
Yeah.
That's actually very crucial for a CC class, is the ability to do minor heals to yourself and still maintain control of the battlefield.
Yeah, and Strike brings up a good point that the TDD melee, as I recall, I think that's accurate, has some sort of a small self heal as well. In fact, I think the only realm that I don't know of that has any class that has a self heal is the Arthurians, because why do we get things? I didn't think the Flame Wardens had a self regeneration.
Let's see here. I have them open.
Yes, crack it open.
It's definitely, it's not in a boon at least, and that's the thing. Like the boons are universal. Once you've chosen it, it's always applying to you.
No, there's
it's
nothing
not a
that
boon for
heals
Flame
the
Warden.
Flame Warden.
It becomes, if there is, it's a spell, and therefore it's
all
very
of it does
situational.
self damage though, almost.
Do what?
Almost all of it does self damage. Primal Fire, Mystic Fire, and Incandescent Fire does a small amount of fire damage to the caster.
Oh, to you
So
as you're casting it.
We don't get heals. We get self damage instead.
You know, I actually hadn't noticed that either. Now that you mentioned that, I had somehow glossed over that detail. But you're right.
Maybe
all the fire
Flame
Flame Warden abilities.
Don't run away. I'm going to kill myself.
Which really, this is kind of making the Flame Warden into the, I think it was the sorceress in Warhammer, Online, where basically they didn't do damage to themselves, but the more you cast, the more you build up this chaos magic until it exploded and did tons of damage to yourself. If you didn't manage it properly.
But that's 2 resources to manage, which is the only class in the casters that have to do that. Because you have to manage your blood pool and your health pool, because you're doing damage. You're reducing your blood pool by casting.
Everyone has to manage your health pool.
Yeah, and so no,
because
but
not everybody damages themselves.
You just have to take into consideration the extra damage you're going to be taking.
Yeah, the only things I will say is
that does that.
We don't know what the blood cost of these spells are, so it could be that the the Flame Warden does damage to himself, but doesn't use as much blood, so they're not quite as vulnerable that way. It could also be that the Flame Warden does significantly more damage than any of these other classes, and so they also hurt themselves, and they only have the one element, so people can stack the damage resistance against them to negate.
Flame Wardens do have the boon to reduce blood costs. Looking at all the 2 others, they don't have that.
That makes fireproof extremely important as a boon.
That is true, actually.
If you do self damage, you will have to take the fireproof unless you want to really run low health most of the time.
That is potentially true, yeah.
I would hope that if that's the case, I would hope, because I suspect that's not going to be the only boons that are specialized for the Flame Warden. One of them being increased damage the lower your health is.
Right. At the moment, this is it. This is what's going into testing as of next week. It is important to note.
Said during the wrap up, they're going for the basics.
Right.
Yeah. They're going to expand them later on. They're going for the basics to put them to the test first.
It is important to note there is a basic list of boons and banes that everyone has access to that I haven't linked at all. So while we're on that subject, how important do you think these 5 specific banes and boons for each mage class are going to be compared to the universal ones?
Well, they're very specialized, so I know if I play the Flame Warden, I would definitely go for Fireproof and Boiling Blood.
Yeah, I think they're going to be they're pretty important for customization, because like if you look at the Wave Weaver, I will note that their boon that heals them also reduces their damage. So they do reduce damage, but they heal themselves a little bit. So there is a trade-off there. I just thought it was noteworthy because for the most part, no other classes have any kind of a heal except the healers. But they have a a boon that mentions doing increased damage over time. So obviously the Wave Weaver also does damage over time. It's not just the Flame Warden that has a fair bit of that.
And
And
have
also
a longer duration. It's their first boon increases the damage over time, reduces
they do have a lower
increase
blood
the
resource.
duration, and lowers the blood cost. That's a huge boon.
they actually have a boon that makes their the Kolga rune abilities decrease the target's frost resistance. I had actually missed that one, so they also have that in there.
Right now,
the trade-off for those boons though is they're only relevant to runes that utilize that name. So Rand's Favor only works on runes that use the Chastament of Rand.
Yeah.
So there's a trade-off there. It's not a universal thing like the Flame Warden is.
Yeah. The thing I thought was most notable for the Wave Weaver is their unpronounceable Bilgia's Frost runes deal high disruption. So
pronounce that last one.
Udir's Might.
Is that a D?
Udir's Might. Yeah, I think it's a D though. But yeah, so they deal high disruption. I don't think any of the other mages have anything that really mentions disruption.
No.
So I will say, while I don't think any particular mages are supposed to be countering a specific other mage, I do feel like the Wave Weaver has a lot of abilities that could mess up all the other mages, because they can obviously come in and slow them, disrupt them, and just outlast them while they're trying to use abilities.
That's the it almost feels like a tanky-ish mage.
Yeah.
Which, to be real, I mean, all the Viking stuff kind of feels that way with how they're designing.
Yeah.
All of it seems to be like a little bit more beefy than everything else around it. Whereas the TDD, like looking through their stuff, it just seems like damage, more damage. I think the specialty for these 5 boons for the Druid is really what type of damage you want to do. Because each one's either chaos or this one's void. This one's chaos or this one's void. Or this one, when you die, you deal void damage to people around you.
Yeah. They have arcane in there. Does that make that 3 or is that one of the ones that you're including?
I think they can also do arcane damage. Impure Arcana can do arcane as well. So they actually have 3 different types of damage they can do. Which I think fits the TDD. Mantra.
Looking at the 3 major classes, I'm gonna say the Flame Warden looks like the least interesting and the least powerful.
I would say I don't necessarily agree, because, and this is a good thing to move us into shapes, the Flame Warden is the only one with a wall.
Yeah.
Yes and no. The Druid's Rift is basically a wall.
It is, but it says it appears in front of the caster, so it's a rift that appears only in front of the caster. Whereas a wall,
does the Flame Wardens. It's a little ways away, but it is in front.
And the trap from the Wave Weaver is the same.
That's different though, because it's visually unnoticeable from anyone except your own realm.
True.
So the rift you can see, the wall you can see, the trap you cannot see if you're going against it.
This is very much an assumption on my part, but given what we've seen in very much older test versions and the fact that it's called a wall, I would assume the wall is bigger than the others. Now the rift could be, there's no way to tell how big a rift is, but I kind of hope that the wall is a larger effect, because what we saw in much older versions of the game were some sizable walls that could block entire passageways. Yeah. And if the Flame Warden has that as a tactical move to block off areas, that is a pretty powerful thing. If everyone can do it, then...
like if the wall cannot be damaged, then it's only a duration spell, and it blocks off. You can't go through until it goes down.
Well,
you can't damage it.
You can. That's how it does damage, as you come into contact with it.
Yeah, because if every one of them has a shape that is basically an obstacle that just places in front of them and people can't walk through it easily, but it's flavored differently, then they're not custom shapes. They're basically the same damn thing.
That's kind of what the impression. Honestly, that's the impression I got from shapes, is that they're all basically the same thing. Even the Wave Weaver has a wave, which is technically a wall of water that pushes towards you. Yeah. It may be in a different slot visually on the list of things they have, but it's a wall. So I think there are a lot of similarities between the shapes that they all have, and they're just calling them different things.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I feel about it, Strike. I think there's benefits to all three of them, but my hope is that a wall, like a rift, is something that completely covers the front of them. It's like a circle. It's more, in my mind, at least how I picture it working, and again, we haven't seen it, but how I picture it working from the name of it, it sounds like something that would block the person, the caster themselves. And same thing with the trap. It's unseen, and it mostly blocks the caster. Whereas a wall is going to block multiple people and block like a whole line of people because it's a wall. If it's not wide, it's not a fucking wall. It's just a pole at that point.
Yeah,
it's a pillar of flame.
Right now, the pillar of flame is not that big in testing. I think it definitely needs to gain some dimension to it.
I will say the other thing to keep in mind with these shapes is, and this is what I didn't go into earlier, for is the other ability that each of them has, which is quite different. For the Flame Warden, they have a dart volley, which this is where we were talking about the darts and how this could be darts are basically a closer range. Oh shit! Button, someone's coming at me. I can slow them and then dart them and keep casting it really fast. But to me, the Flame Warden could also be made a kind of a medium range, quick DPS class, because you don't necessarily have to stand at the far back and do these really long range AoE fire spells. You can play the risky role, get in, and you have a dart volley which fires 5 of these darts at the same time, and basically just be like fire damage, fire damage, with this particular shape.
Definitely. This sounds like something that would work amazing with a slow, which they don't have, but they do have the increased speed, so that I can see them running by doing that and then running away.
Deep
A
Stone
bigger
Lava.
slow.
More slow. They have a crappy
slow. More slow. It sounds like something that would work really well with the Wave Weaver. So it'll be interesting to see how more of a closer ranged version of a Flame Warden would utilize any of these things. But
what it actually first made me think about is, the Arthurians again are very defensive as a realm. So if you have a wall of melee people and you throw a couple Flame Wardens nearby them, they can throw up, and people are clashing with you, they can throw up firewalls in front of their own people and then do these closer range dart volleys to add significant damage to the front line, potentially. Whereas the Druid, their other specialty shape is projection, which is a very slow-moving projectile with a high degree of tracking. And how they describe this in the stream basically seems like a homing magic ball that you just go, here, go kill that guy, and then it slowly starts moving around the field like, I'm going to get you. I'm going to get you.
That definitely makes it seem like it's a longer range compared to the Flame Warden's special there. Everything with a slower moving projectile and high tracking seems to be longer range.
Yep.
Yeah. So that really seems to me, the projection really seems to me like a way to just go, okay, I am going to hit you with the spell. It's going to happen. Yeah. I'm casting it, and now I'm...
the wall to actually block off stuff.
I would as well, but I don't feel like it will, because it's likely going to be like a firewall spell, so... I feel like it'll probably do a high amount of damage, but I don't think it'll stop people from actually going through it.
No, that's why I was mentioning panic earlier. It's like it can't physically prevent you, but it could mentally mess with you.
Yeah. Which would be pretty cool, because especially because the Arthurians don't have a lot of other ways to induce panic, at least that we've seen so far. I believe
until they actually introduce the Enchanted Knight.
Yeah, I was going to say the Shapeshifter has some panic methods, but that's... for the most part, it's about it. So it would be nice if they had some way. Now, we don't know for sure that it doesn't block. I don't think it does.
Right now, it definitely doesn't. I can say that.
Yeah, in testing right now. But in my opinion, it should. Because it's one of the tools that... otherwise, as Strike said, It's basically a ground. It's a long shaped ground effect.
It
It's
is
exactly the same.
technically a ground effect, yeah. And what the worst part about it right now is that you have no control over placement. It is a set
Yeah.
distance in front of you. You don't get to choose where it comes up. It just pops up that much feet in front
Yeah.
of you. So you have to know where you're at and where you're wanting
Yeah,
to place
that
it
that
and
that's
position
a
yourself.
real big flaw in
Yeah.
concept,
And
in
that's
my
kind of like
opinion.
a UI issue though. They just have to,
Yeah,
similar to shooting
mhm.
siege, they just have to give you an indication of where the spell is going to go.
Yeah.
Um,
But yeah, I would like the wall to actually block, because in terms of strategy, that would be extremely important, because you can divide a force uh, in two by just putting a wall behind the attacking team and just blocking them from getting any
yeah,
reinforcements.
we'll have
See,
to say
I
there's
agree
no.
with that.
I would agree that it is very useful. It's perhaps too useful, and I'll say that I don't see how it can block because it does damage, and if it blocks, you don't go
Right.
into it and you don't take damage. So, at least
That's the
intent
only
wise,
weird
it
thing
seems
about
like
it.
they're not gonna. I don't think they're gonna do that.
All
Um,
you don't know if it does damage. It's a shape.
that's
You
true.
could do it with anything. All it says is it creates a wall of an effect in front of the
Well,
caster.
you have to do it with a rune though, which is
Well,
fire,
right now
fire,
it does
fire,
damage.
lava, or
Yeah.
smoke.
Right. So the runes do the damage, and the
So
shapes determine it. But right now it does damage.
they could give us an earth rune or something, and then we could perhaps
Yeah.
do a stone wall. That's possible. Um, Theoretically, though, that actually means you could do a wall with any of these runes. So you could have a lava.
Yes,
You could have a lava wall, which would
you
slow
can.
movement. Which would, I guess,
Yeah.
slow movement, but do less damage.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's any of these runes can use any of these shapes. So you have all these
Yeah.
combinations.
You can make a smoke wall, which would make it so that they can't see through, which then does block attacks because they can't see through to attack people.
Yeah.
I hadn't actually thought about that, but yeah, you could do a smoke wall and basically just smoke screen your whole fighting force from long range attacks, which would be interesting.
I'd love to
Yeah.
see the visual changes and all. There's so many combinations and
Yeah.
as Ben says, permutations of these things, and I want to see each of them have their own distinct visual flair.
Oh
Yeah,
definitely.
the thing for me on whether or not the wall will be really cool is whether or not is how far away, how wide it is, and how far away
And
you
how
can
far away
cast
you
it.
can place it.
So if you
Yeah.
can place it a good distance, a decent distance away, not like super far, but at least to where you can walk most of the way up to the line, and they go, okay, in front of my fighters, and then move back.
Yeah,
That's
right.
then it's like, okay, cool spell.
Like a
Right now it's
range
about
of
10 to
effect.
15 meters in front of you, whatever that number
And you
is,
choose
right in
and you
front of you.
choose you can choose the distance between 10 to 15 or 5 to 15
Yeah, but
meters
because
in front of you.
that's kind of what I would like to see is where, okay, the trap literally goes right in front of you. The rift goes in front of you, maybe a little bit in front of you, but it's mostly just for the caster, or maybe someone standing right by them. Whereas
Yeah.
the wall, being a wall, and because the flame warden really doesn't have a lot of other versatility except for being able to make it smoke, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
And I kind of want to see what a ball of smoke would do now. What's a smoke dart? But anyway, I digress. The other one we hadn't talked about, though, was the Wave Weaver Wave, which to me is another very useful sounding shape. Especially defensively and offensively, but moving up in close range, just being able to slowly go, and all of you take this damage.
Especially with the Belgian Frost rune.
Yeah,
It sounds
frozen ice
extremely
chunks.
powerful.
It sounds just like shards of ice jutting out of the ground in a line in front of you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And being
Icy
a wave,
winds.
I'm assuming it's going to roll through all the targets, so you won't even have to
Yeah.
worry about it being blocked by your allies or anything. It's just going
Yeah,
to
it's
keep.
like an effect. It like the wall. It's from 5 to 15 meters, and it goes from it rolls from 5 all the way to 15, and then it stops at 15 meters, basically.
Now, the one shape I really wanted to talk about, because I think this is pretty cool, it's not unique, but I think it's cool, is the barrier shape, where for the barrier, you can essentially cast a barrier on yourself or an ally, and if someone hits them, they take the effect. Not the ally, but the enemy that strikes them takes an effect of some sort.
Yeah.
And I think that's pretty cool because it basically every mage has some sort of a protective ability they can use. It's still offensive; it does damage, but it's protective in, I guess, a prohibitive fashion.
It's almost supportive.
Yeah, it's a little bit of support that they have, just a little bit. And
I like that, especially in combination with the Moisture Mancer, the Water Weaver.
Yeah.
Being able to apply a barrier to someone else, like your tank, upon when they get hit, applies a CC to the person hitting them.
Mm-hmm.
That would also be really useful for the Flame Warden, to put that on your tanks so they're not a walking target for the range classes with a smoke barrier that reduces the accuracy of the range attacks.
Yeah, though, since it applies to the person who hits them, maybe it would make that person covered in smoke and their sight's reduced. That would be pretty funny. Yeah, it's basically a blind. That would be hilarious.
Yeah.
But very much like it could be used offensively as well. One of the things we've seen in beta that's a problem is the heavy fighters not being able to catch up with archers because they go chasing after the archer, and the archer's like shooting them, and then they run away and they shoot them some more. But the way a mage could cast a barrier on the fighter that applies a slow when you hit them, and so the archer shoots them and suddenly gets slowed.
Right.
Could be kind of cool.
And take damage.
Yeah. If you're an archer in the backlines and suddenly you're now on fire randomly, it's like, what? No one's hitting
what happened to me?
Why am I taking damage? You're suddenly focusing on why you're taking damage instead of on dealing damage.
Yeah, and you're being slowed, so you're not as mobile and things like that.
Yeah, Skylar brings up an interesting point too, slightly off topic, but with the different spells and the different combinations and the VFX and making sure that they're similar enough, but also distinct enough, because these are a lot of different effects. What is visually the difference between a deep stone lava wall and a primal fire wall or a mystic firewall? Because people need to be able to see them and need to be able to tell, this is what's going to happen if I walk into this thing.
I think that'll definitely pop into just the textures they're using to create the spell effects. And largely on, I believe it's Mike who does the VFX, really just messing around with the particles in particular. But textures largely will be the key into keeping something similar, but then different.
Yeah.
Like lava is a very different texture than just fire, or even bluish red mystic fire there, or smoke. Those textures will be important.
It's actually interesting. I was looking at the Druid, and it's interesting that most of their runes and abilities are so damage focused and not necessarily immensely versatile, whereas most of the other TDD classes are very tricksy. They're versatile in the types of damage they can do, because they can do apparently like 3 different types of damage, so that fits within the TDD. But otherwise,
it's all direct damage.
Yeah, they don't have like weird, like all the other 2 classes actually have, like the Flame Warden has a little bit more kind of versatility and tricksiness to some of their different abilities, and the Viking definitely has a lot of different stuff. So it's just an interesting thing that I noted. Of course, we do know that this is not all-encompassing. They have said before the Druid is supposed... I believe it was the Druid that's supposed to have a shape where they can like create a rift and shoot spells out of it from a different location. I believe that was the Druid in the original Mage presentation, way back in the day. Which was a Tuesday. But... I don't know if that's still going to be the thing. I kind of hope it is, because that was kind of cool and iconic for the Druid to be able to be like, I open a portal and I shoot fireballs at you from the right side of the field, to get around walls and stuff. I feel like they've kind of done that maybe with the projection thing, because instead of opening a rift, and now they just have a ball that kind of goes, I'm going to hit you and go around walls and stuff, so screw you. That could be that could be their way of achieving that.
Yeah.
Maybe we were just talking about this. The Druids have direct damage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They have almost all direct damage.
which compared to the others, it insinuates that those runes just deal damage instantly. It's almost like an instant spell. There's no travel time between you and the person. It's direct instantly.
No, because the damage is going to depend on the. It's not going to be instant because it's going to depend on the shape.
Yeah,
I think it's
true.
What would you say the direct is then?
I think it's more just they have abilities that just shoot out and hit people.
Nothing.
It's not. There's no like. There's not a lot of like damage over time in here.
There's no dots.
There's not a lot of
it's direct
it's
damage.
Just basic direct damage.
Just basic. I'm casting void spell. I'm
There's
casting.
no. As far as I know, and I would be very disappointed if it was. There is no hit scan ability in anything. Everything is physics based. Everything is projectile based.
Yeah, and if you look
There's
at
no
the
hit scan where the moment you hit the button, it hits the target. There's always a travel time.
If you look at
they're
the
just
druid,
not bringing enough flare.
if you look at the druid, looking at their boons, their bane, or their boons, their focus, almost everything mentions damage. Like everything is just increased damage, decreased damage, increased damage. Does this type of damage? Does this type of damage? Whereas the Flame Wardens like got a smoke screen that they can do, and the Wave Weaver is just like freezing and slowing people left and right. All of them have a barrier, and all of them have a wall or a rift or something. It's just most of the TDD seem to have like weird things they can do. That seems to be like an iconic TDD thing. They can do weird stuff. The Flame Warden, so far. I mean, not the Flame Warden. Sorry, the Druid so far, not so much. But I actually kind of like that just because while I do like that each realm has kind of an iconic sort of flair, you could do too much of that. It's nice for every other realm to get a little bit of versatility and things kind of mixed in occasionally. The Fianna, as I recall, they're the one that, as I recall, get a self-heal, which almost nobody else has any kind of self-heal. They get like a regeneration. They can also get a speed boost ability of some sort, as I recall. Like when they're I forget exactly how it works, but I think they have some sort of a brief speed boost thing they can do. Nobody else gets that. Then their archer just has so much freaking CC, it's ridiculous compared to most other classes.
Well, the Fianna is the heavy fighter.
Yes.
The TDD. I believe they also take fire damage more than any other. They can through Banes. They're just naturally more capable of taking more damage from fire.
Yeah, it's just generally been the theme for the Tuatha that they're faster and more versatile. And I was kind of making the note that I guess the Druid, instead of being more versatile and that a lot of the other classes have like some CC or things that they can do for the TDD, they're more versatile in that they just have multiple types of damage.
Right, which is versatile in its own way.
It makes them unpredictable because you don't know whether you should stack chaos resistance, whether you should stack void resistance. You pretty much just have to go, both.
When they're dealing just flat, raw, awesome damage, and you can choose between 3 different types of flat, raw, awesome damage, you can adjust to the defenses accordingly.
Yeah. So it is versatile. It's just more of a, I guess, less tricksy, whereas some of the other TDD classes are very fey weird. Let's see. So, we already talked about the barrier shape because that was my next big thing I wanted to talk about, and I kind of slipped into it anyway. But does anybody have anything else they want to talk about these classes? I have something else, but it actually has nothing to do with these classes per se.
Not really. I like the infusions because we haven't talked a lot about it.
That's true.
I like this idea that you can use your victories as a combatant. You can use your victories to increase your power, basically. Quite literally.
To some extent, yeah. Frozen beard. Well, and like for the Flame Warden, having Bogus and being able to knock people back is pretty awesome. My only thing is how you get to actually use these. That's potentially cumbersome.
From what I remember them saying, you're gonna have it's gonna be an element that you add into your skill. as you build it.
Yeah,
Yes.
but then what?
And
When you
it's-
don't want to use them, you have to go in your spell book and actually alter your spell bar just to not
No,
burn them.
there is an option when you create your spell to create the spell to prioritize using an infusion, but to
Or
still
not.
let you cast that same ability, the exact ability, even if you don't have the infusion.
Well, yes,
There's-
but what I'm saying is then you have to go, okay, I don't want to burn my mats for this on this fight because it's not important enough, so I'm going to drag them
Oh,
out of my
you mean-
inventory.
Yeah. So actually, yeah, if you
You
actually
will have to
the
build it
mats
without using the infusion.
and you don't want to use them, you have to build it without the infusion.
Yeah, that's kind of annoying, honestly. That's kind of
They've done the reverse where if you don't have them, you can still use the spell, but if you
Yeah.
do have them and you don't want to use them, you
You
should
will
actually
have to
probably
make
I feel like what they
You-
could do instead, honestly, is make something where you could make the spell to use the infusion, and if you want to use an infusion, you have to hold shift or something when you cast the spell.
that would be
just-
simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then I can go, okay, I'm normally not burning my infusions, but this guy's pissing me off, so take the singing stone, take it.
Yeah. And they've done the same thing with the focus. You can build a spell to utilize the focus or not utilize it without having to
Yeah.
make an extra ability.
which is nice also.
Yeah. Going back to your question though, about the classes, anything else? Typically, mages are very good in a 1v1 environment, and in this game doesn't focus on that, but it does offer it. We're just running around the world. You could be stuck in a 1v1. Is there anything about these three that you feel is either maybe too overpowered in that kind of environment, or in a case of a 1v1v1 with just these three, a Flame Warden versus a Wave Weaver versus a Druid, is there one that is very clearly the dominant power?
Honestly, I would think the Wave Weaver.
I would agree, except in cases of long range firepower. Like if the other two have the range on them, then I mean that applies for anything. Though, if you get the jump on somebody and you have longer range than them and they have to wade up to you, you're gonna win that fight. But if they're in a reasonable casting distance of each other, the Wave Weaver just seems like they're likely gonna have better ways to kill them, especially because I don't know what this does and what it doesn't do, but some of the Wave Weaver abilities mention a freeze.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that's
Hopefully
literally
it's not-
like a full CC freeze, or does that just mean
It's slow.
It's
additional?
just slow.
Well, because they mentioned slow elsewhere. They mention a moist effect on the person, and then like a freeze, and they mention
the
slows.
Colgus chill. If you look at the Colgus chill, it says also applies freeze, reducing their movement speed.
Okay, that is
So
true.
the freeze effect is
But then what does the moist effect do? Just make them take
I'm not
additional
sure.
damage? I'm not sure.
It's more of a buff, a requirement, a pre-requirement buff in order to even apply a freeze. Similar to the Frost Mage in WoW, there were a lot of, you had to have a certain buff in order to gain benefits from some of your spells. You have to apply the debuff to them first in order to be able to utilize that ability.
I do think that with most classes in the game, it will come down to how you're built, how you're spec'd out and customized. If you make a Flame Warden with the intention of killing other mages, then I think you're going to be able to do that pretty easily, because you could, for instance, just throw a firewall in front of yourself. Their attacks are going to hit the firewall, even if they can still walk through it, and you would choose abilities on your ability bar that are going to go over or around your firewall, knowing that that's what you're going to do. And I think that would, that's definitely going to change things. But just in general terms, I would assume that the Wave Weaver is actually, I say that, but now that I think about it, I actually think the Wave Weaver could also quite likely be the worst in 1v1 combat against other mages, but the best against other classes. The reason I say that is because mages don't give a shit about slow. You can slow me all day. I don't care. I'm going to shoot fireballs at you. And and they do the least damage, whereas both the Flame
they do the
Warden
least
and
direct
the
damage,
Druid are going to be DPSing the crap out of
but
them.
they do disruption damage, which
That is true.
interrupts your cast.
So I guess it kind of depends on how much disruption they do
Yeah.
compared to the damage.
But overall, it seems like the Wave Weaver in any one-on-one environment seems to be the stronger, capable.
In general, I would say yes.
In general,
especially against like any melee combatant, the Wave Weaver's got slows, they've got self-heal potentially, they can disrupt attacks. I feel like they're going to be much more survivable than either of the other two.
The same question then, conversely though, in a group environment, whether it's an 8-man group or a full like multi 8-man groups and just a Zerg almost, let's call it a pseudo Zerg, do one of these stand out as being the clear winner?
Defending against the Zerg or participating in the Zerg?
Being in a Zerg, being in a 50 versus 50 fight.
Let's say the Druid, because of the drag damage.
I would be inclined to say the Wave Weaver.
In a Zerg environment, actually the Flame Warden, because you have healers. So you don't have to worry about the self-damage, and you can blast.
It's true. I would say, for me, I kind of feel like maybe the Wave Weaver, specifically because of the wave ability. Because while you're in a big Zerg ball, of course, and you're going to hit people and move, there is a moment where you hit them and you stop to kill them all, and then the wave is just going to AoE through the whole mass of enemies, depending on how they're grouped up. But generally, it just seems like, you're smacking against groups, and then you're going to AoE the crap out of all of them. Of course, they all have some kind of an explosion ability they can do. So there is that as well.
Strike is saying that the Flame Warden combo with one doing the fire resistance or the debuff to fire resistance while the others are nuking.
That's true.
Is a very, very potent thing.
That's true. The Druid also has that, though. The Druid could reduce that damage, that resistance as well. Though I think theirs is a boon, maybe. I don't remember. Or maybe
they have boons that just increased.
Oh no, they have runes they have runes that decrease the damage, so decrease void resistance.
Oh yeah.
So So actually, Druids have Outer Void, which reduces the target's void resistance and deals bonus void damage each time a void effect is applied to the target. So I would actually agree with Kriss and say Druids at this point, because you could just have a bunch of Druids stacking void damage and going, all right, one guy's doing Outer Void, everyone else is just going to burst the living shit out of void damage.
And they have that 3 different damage types, so they can split. If they have like say 6 Druids, they can have 2 doing Arcane, 2 doing Void, 2 doing Chaos, and really just cover a lot of ground.
Yeah, I do still think that as Skylar said, the Wave Weaver having CC in a game where there's not tons of CC, that is still perhaps important for overwhelming the enemy and keeping them in place so that you can AoE them with all those attacks. But I don't, them having the diminished damage, I don't know that it's going to, necessarily prevail in that fashion. Given that how Fire Warden stuff is set up, I would certainly hope that they would do more damage than the other two.
Yeah, I would hope too.
Because otherwise, I don't know what the point of the Flame Warden is if they're not doing significantly more damage than anybody else. Which, honestly, as I recall, was kind of how Warhammer Online worked. The Bright Mage was like the highest DPS mage ever in the game, and they basically just did fire DPS to everything and blasted the living crap out of stuff. And it's been a long time since I played it, but that's how I want to recall it working. So, and I remember a lot of people saying they were OP as crap because they did so much damage. Been a long time, but it's my vague recollection of that. So we're about towards the end of our stream time here. So the last thing I had that I really wanted to talk about was something not class related, but something else they had brought up and presented on in that same stream, which was the new ability builder, which I'm pretty excited about.
Yes,
one,
I agree.
Because the new UI looks way simpler than the old UI. The old UI was bad. I mean,
It
obviously,
wasn't even a UI.
it was a
Yeah.
placeholder. It was a little placeholder with boxes and you drag stuff, but it was horrible. So for us, so
It was
this
bad.
is way better, way simpler. The other thing they talked about was the ability book, where you can
Yes.
put all your abilities you make, and it has performance stats in there to show you for each of your
Will.
abilities
Which is great.
how much damage it does. What's your average damage? How much damage of that damage is mitigated when you use it, so you can actually see, okay, is everybody stacking fire resistance against me? How much disruption? How many kills you get? All that kind of stuff. And
Not in yet, and not in even next week. The new ability builder and stuff will be fully in. I believe next week is what they said. When it came out, it's already in now. This was like 2 weeks ago, but that stat stuff is still being worked on. But they showed the concept art for how it will look, and I'm excited about that. That is super important to min-maxers and people who like to look at what's
Yes.
actually going on behind the scenes.
Absolutely, and that was something I was really excited about. Sorry, I got distracted by chat because pointing out that if Flame Wardens do that much ranged damage, then Arthurians also have the Blackguard, which is supposed to be the highest damage archer. So we then basically just have super tons of long range DPS, which I am fine with. But we can be boring and just kill everything. That's fine. But yeah, I'm really excited about the ability builder, and especially this performance stats, and being able to easily open it up and click on my ability and go, okay, is this doing the damage I think it should be doing? I'm especially excited to see the damage mitigation stat, so that I can actually see how much. Sorry, I got hiccups. Other people, I'm assuming it's going to tell us how much damage from that ability other people are mitigating and resisting.
Yes. I don't think you can choose per person, like I know Strike is our third, and let's say Grimslag. I don't think you can see how much damage is Grimslag specifically mitigated against you, but you can see in general classes, like how many Fianna, how much damage are Fianna in general mitigating against me, etc., etc.
Yeah, that's really what I want, is just in general sense. Do I need to build up something to deal with that fire resistance? Do I need to use my spell more often that reduces fire resistance, or am I just wasting it because they're not stacking fire resistance?
Yeah.
Yeah, please include a compare button.
Yeah.
That would be nice. Or side-by-side view.
Right.
All right. Well, I think that's pretty much it for us for tonight. It was a good chat. I was really glad to see the Mage information, so we had something kind of firm and concrete to talk about.
A lot of information
like
for
new
one.
stuff came out, but new stuff didn't really come out. They just talked about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's stuff they hadn't really been talking about. We haven't gotten an update on class abilities in like 2.5 years, so
right.
It's pretty nice.
I don't think they did those presentations for the other 3 classes. The heavy fighter.
No.
I'd like them to go back.
Oh
and
yeah,
do
that would be nice.
It would be kind of cool. But at any rate, thanks for hanging out, everybody, and coming and checking us out for Mages in episode 70. We will, of course, be back in 2 weeks, hopefully with a interview on art stuff. Possibly not. Otherwise, we will update otherwise with a topic and let you know. So until then, I'll catch you later.